if you implement something like a new form of generative AI into your organization, it doesn't automatically become a valuable asset for the organization.
Why is it so urgent that we talk about responsible AI in education right now? What is at stake if we don't?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, but I think that what's really at stake is.
Hi everyone, my name is Munawar Khan and I welcome you to another episode of Control Plus Ed, where we discuss technology and education in the same podcast. In classrooms around the world, AI is showing up as a teaching assistant, a tutor, a planner, sometimes even a decision maker. But while we are busy training AI to teach, who is making sure that it is being taught to behave responsibly? Today's episode dives into the critical but often overlooked issue of responsible AI, how we ensure these systems are actually safe, inclusive, and truly serve students and educators alike. To unpack this, I'm joined by someone very special who is at the forefront of this work, Clara Hawking. Clara is the executive director of Compass Education, where she leads AI governance for mainly EU organizations, design ethical frameworks, and support policy transformation for education organizations. Clara brings a rare and urgent perspective to this conversation. Clara, I welcome you today to today's podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate even more that you're making space for this conversation. It's an urgent time for us to get the word out to everyone.
Thank you very much, Clara. Pleasure is mine. Clara, before we begin, I have some very interesting questions for you, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers, they are also waiting for those questions. But can you tell us a little bit about Compass Education so we have a background?
Absolutely. So Compass Education is a consulting firm. We work primarily with educational organization from primary school to secondary school, but also universities, colleges around the world. Our primary market right now is definitely Europe, the UK and the European Union. But we're also developing quite quickly in other regions for a couple of different reasons, but primarily because AI regulations are starting to come to more and more countries, and educational organization or any youth-facing organization, including sports organizations and health organizations, are starting to realize that there's more to AI integration than just getting the tech and using the tech, but also issues around how to keep everybody safe in the space of using the tech. And that's where we come in.
Okay, that is actually very interesting. And first of all, thank you for the work you're doing. Generative AI and AI in general these days, of course, it has seen popularity that it never saw before. So let's start with the big picture here. Why is it so urgent that we talk about responsible AI in education right now? What is at stake if we don't?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, but I think that what's really at stake is a pushback. It is people saying we don't trust this and we don't want to use this because they have been overwhelmed by the speed of which it has arrived. They haven't found meaningful ways to use it. They have heard all of the hype, but it hasn't resonated with them. And certainly in education, where we work with children, our biggest risk, of course, is that not only the teachers are rejecting the technology, but also that the families are rejecting the technologies, and perhaps even the children themselves, which can hinder not only successful integration, but of course also hinder meaningful learning about AI literacy, the skills that are needed for families and students going forward. So I think that's the absolute biggest risk, is that people reject it on grounds that they simply cannot trust it. And that's why we need to have these conversations now.
Okay. And what is digital debt? If you could explain this term in very simple words for majority of the educators, especially because I think while we are at it, while we are integrating AI in education, which is really good, it needs to be done, but we do not understand a lot that comes with it. So if you could please explain this term and what it means for educators globally.
Yeah, absolutely. So digital debt is a term that you probably or maybe haven't heard before, but you'll probably hear it more and more in the coming year and a half. 2026 is really predicted to be the year where we will experience what some have called a digital debt tsunami. And in very sort of simple form, digital debt is a sort of accumulation of short-term technology, often that has been unexamined in its use, technology decisions to integrate that in to an organization, but causing long-term problems. So this could be an example of something like ChatGPT. The school leader decides, oh, I've heard that everybody needs to start using ChatGPT, so I'm making it available for everyone in the organization. But just like technical debt, when you've bought some type of technology that doesn't have the capability to grow with the organization, you're stretching the integration far beyond the code of the technology, but also not including it into strategy, policy, safeguarding, governance, how you staff, how you procure other technology, and also the overall digital culture. So, sort of in plain terms, is schools have adopted an AI or an educational technology tool without a clear plan for training, integration, and evaluation. And staffs are expected to figure it out without professional development, where some maybe are early adopters and some choose to resist. And digital debt also happens when there's a lack of data protection, accessibility, and also interoperability inside of the organization. And that happens as a sort of afterthought. Oh, we hadn't thought about this. And then also when procurement, meaning purchasing something or contracting for something, is reactive. We need something now, like we need generative AI now because everybody's using it, rather than a strategy for the organization. Does it align with your mission and your vision? And so what we see more and more is schools having overlapping tools that no one really fully understands. We have super inconsistent data practices in organizations, both for the students, but also for the staff. And we see greater levels of burnout among the staff because they're overloaded with tools that either don't really support them or that they don't really understand. And so they flee from it. All of it leads to a mountain of what we call digital debt.
This is really interesting, and this actually leads me to another question that is very related. You mentioned teachers are exposed to several tools, and if there is no clear policy available at the organization's level, it is going to be a problem for the teachers. They may actually be burned out even more because of that. There is a term for that when any organizations, employees, or team members, they use their own tools. It's called shadow AI. It is not governed by the organization. So in terms of education or AI education, how does this lead to this problem of digital debt? What does this mean exactly when in an educational institute or organization, the team members, the colleagues, they all are using their own tools, especially in terms of security? Does it threaten the data privacy in any way?
Yeah, that's a really huge question, and it's such an important question because the short answer is it undermines the organization, and yes, it threatens data security. But it's more complex than so because there's a lot of things that's moving an organization into that space. One is that EdTech often has been a relatively easy sell in the sense that educators don't really understand the intricacies of the technology, how exactly it works, but just that they've been introduced to a product that seems as if this is exciting and this could get students more enthusiastic about learning, and it seems to be working for that teacher. And what many schools have done is that because they don't have a clear policy on how they procure technology across the framework of the school, teachers have set up individual accounts. They may be using their school email to set it up, but often their individual accounts, or they have been encouraged by edtech companies to sign up to test the tool for a period of time without truly understanding what it was that they signed up for. And what sometimes or often happens is that either that person will continue to use it as an individual account, or a department may think, oh, this is a great piece of technology. And before you know it, 5 people inside of a department is using it. Suddenly they're uploading student information without anyone really having oversight. They may now be using it to grade students, grade them in a way that has impact on the future of their educational pathway. And suddenly you have all kinds of moving parts within something that just started with a teacher wanting to test a new system. So what's really important with these new types of technology is that risk is multiplied in a series of ways, among others because generative AI is relatively efficient in making predictions that are somewhat more accurate, in the sense that they can predict the learning or the perceived learning for an individual student. And that seems really attractive. It also is the case that generative AI can create lesson plans, some good, some not good at all. But they are being sold as if they can cut down the amount of administrative work that a teacher has. And that on its face sounds very attractive. But the reality is that when you buy into this too quickly, what you haven't ensured is, does the teacher really understand the risk framework that they're working with? What is it really that they're bringing into the classroom? How are the AIs really making lesson plans? How are the children's data exposed? Will the children be forgotten when they leave the educational facility, or does the data sit somewhere? Is it being trained to train more AI? And have the parents, the families, the guardians, have they given true informed consent? Have they said, I'm okay with you putting my children's information into this AI? And that's really missing in the framework today. So really important that we do start changing the way that we have tech on campus and procured in a way that there is a central understanding of how it's used and who uses what.
This is extremely interesting, and right now everyone is jumping on this bandwagon of using AI everywhere. It's not just AI in education, it's AI everywhere. I've often heard CEOs asking for AI implementation. It's not that solving a particular problem using AI, but implementing AI somehow. And of course, AI or education is no different. Um, what are some of the issues that you foresee that we would see in near future because of all this chaos, everyone using on platforms without understanding what exactly is happening with the data?
Yeah, I think the things we're already seeing now, and I think we're only going to see more of it. We're seeing that indeed CEOs have gotten the message that there's something about AI that they need to do, and so they're making quick decisions to get on board with it, but they're lacking a strategy. And I think that we see that it hinders effective integration of the technology. If you implement something like a new form of generative AI into your organization, it doesn't automatically become a valuable asset for the organization. You have to train your staff in how to use it, not just the functionalities, but how to use it to make their workspace more efficient and better. You have to use it in a way that you can allow for innovation and new methodologies within your organization without risking harm. You need to understand the outputs. You need to have a way to audit the outputs to ensure that a particular bias doesn't spread throughout your organization. So I think a really good example of that is something like lesson plans. We recently saw a very large tech organization out of the US released a prompting guide for educators. But the problem, one of the many problems with this particular prompting guide, is that it's very teacher centric. It's designed with a generous thought to make the teachers' work more efficient and faster. But the lesson plans are actually not very good because they're focused on the teacher's need rather than curriculum, the age of the child, and the needs of children in that learning situation. And so it's been designed and it sounds great. We should all integrate this, but teachers aren't trained in using it well. So the adoption really stalls. One thing that teachers don't have time for is nonsense. Teachers are always in triage, and they often have to choose between, do I have time to go to the bathroom or do I have time to eat lunch today? But usually they don't have time for both. And in that environment, they have a very, very short amount of time to decide, do I want to use this or not? And if they don't find value in it, they won't use it. So adoption stalls, integration stalls, and in the long time, not only your legal exposure grows, but also you get locked into systems that really don't have that long-term sustainable growth strategy. So really, really important to not get sucked into the hype, but press pause just for a minute and reevaluate what is our vision here? What is our mission here? And how can we use this technology to achieve our vision and mission before you buy into a new ecosystem?
That is very interesting, Clara. So, is it fair to say that personalization in, for example, lesson planning or any teaching resources generated by AI, personalization is more important than the visual appeal and the speed of the resource?
Yeah, in yes and no, because we know that there has been a lot of really positive cases that we can see where more personalized learning has led to better learning outcomes. But we also see some early research that seem to indicate that students are saying, yes, I learn better, I'm more engaged, it's more interesting, and I learn faster, but I feel lonely, I'm alone in this space. And we also know that AI tends to give you what you want. It tends to accommodate your desires. And the more an AI adjusts to what it is that you prefer, your preferred learning style, your preferred level of difficulty, the less you build resilience. And we know that children do need to develop that, not just as an approach to life, but also as a way to persevere in a time that's really driven by advanced technologies. Resilience will be even more important. So on its face, it sounds great because you can meet the needs of students that have often been the ones that have been the most overlooked, students with special learning needs, or students that are bilingual, or students that have recently moved into a school where they're using a language that they don't use as their primary language in where they came from. However, there's lots of little details in a very complex learning environment that AI still hasn't been designed to address. So it's this sort of yes and no approach with caution, I would say.
This is quite honestly an eye opener for me, because what I take from this is personalization. A lot of personalization makes learning very comfortable for the learner, which is good, but too comfortable is not good either. So you need that human aspect that challenges you a little bit. So it's not that the teacher, when it's a human, sometimes, we are human, we miss out on things, but we become a little more challenging for the learner. Sometimes that is also good. So it has to be a balance. Okay, that is really fantastic. So you spoke about training, that it is important that teachers at an organization, they're trained. What should be the criteria of selection for a tool in the first place? Because training would come after that.
I think the criteria in a very short answer would be, is it safe? Anytime we bring something into the classroom as educators, as adults, we should always begin with that question. Is it safe? Just yesterday, I had a conversation with someone who was creating a video about art and wanted to ask me if it would be appropriate to put in a very a very difficult art piece that included some levels of animals being hurt. And I said, sure, you could do it because it provokes thought, but is it worth the risk that even one child would see this and experience it in a traumatic way? Is there another way that we can approach the same without having to go to extremes? And I think that this is a no-brainer question. All educators are asking themselves this before they bring it in. Is this safe? If an educator can't truly answer that question, they shouldn't bring it in. So what does that mean for training? It means that training must meet at least that level of transparency for the educator so that they can make an informed, educated decision about whether that piece of technology should be brought into the classroom. And if they're not capable or feel competent in making that decision, they should reject it. I think that's a good starting point and the only starting point. Then we can innovate, but we have to make sure that the children, the students, the people we're trying to teach are safe first and foremost.
Is there currently any framework that exists to help schools or educational institutions in coming up with that selection criteria? I know it cannot be one thing, but is there any standard already available, or are we mainly going with our gut feeling, as we usually call it?
Unfortunately, for most of the planet, it has been a little gut feeling, but we are seeing some frameworks appearing that absolutely can help school organizations today in figuring out how to do this. We're seeing regulation that are risk-based regulation, not rights-based regulation, appearing in different countries. So Brazil is working on some things. Peru has already put some really nice things in place. The European Union has the EU AI Act, which is a big regulatory framework put in place that actually helps schools understand step by step, how can I integrate the technology following this framework, addressing risk as we go along, identifying the levels of risk for our organization, and what's the minimum amount of training that my staff should have in order for us to bring this technology in. We will see more and more regulation around the world. There are other countries as well. I know in Canada has been waffling back and forth a little bit, but we're starting to head in the right direction. Hopefully within the next year or so, we'll see some meaningful federal regulation on AI in education. But those are all regulatory frameworks that both can guide schools, but also for the schools in those locations must guide schools in order for them not to be non-compliant with the law.
Okay, so you spoke about risks. What are some of the risks that EdTech founders or school leaders should consider while either building a platform that addresses AI in education, or for a school leader who is looking forward to implementing one?
So I think one of the absolute biggest risk is that these generative AI can make predictions, and we need to make sure that those predictions are accurate, and we need to make sure that we always have human oversight in how it's predicting. So one risk that we know is very relatively low risk is something like a chatbot that pops up. You can ask it some questions and it pops back out again. But if the chatbot is working with a child and it can make an analysis based on the conversation with that child, make a prediction based on the child's, say, emotions, for example, it is a whole different level of risk. So, for example, if we have a chatbot that informs a teacher, I can see that this child is working with the EdTech and they're not very engaged, they're not using it very much, and they don't seem to answer a lot of the questions. That is simply alerting the teacher to a situation. But if the chatbot says, and that makes me think that the child is feeling sad and that they are upset about something, that's a different level of risk, because it not only risks the teacher making the wrong conclusion quickly about this child. Oh, I have a sad child, or an angry child, or a happy child. But also it's making a decision that's saved in data about the child's emotional state. That's very sensitive, very private information, very high risk. Other examples are something like grading. We have seen big tech telling teachers that AI can help you grade, and it's true. And in some forms of AI, it's relatively low risk. You're asked a question, was it correct, answered, yes or no. But if you're grading an essay, we see a much more complex ecosystem. For example, we've seen in some early studies that AI has a preference when it's grading mathematics. If you upload mathematics work and you give the work an Anglo-English sounding name, and you upload the exact same work but with a maybe Asian sounding name, the AI will give the Asian sounding name a higher grade than the Anglo name. Why? Because it has understood in the data that it has that there is essentially a bias to predict. You're more probably right in that prediction. That's a major, major problem. That's before we get to uploading girls' names for the same math problems.
Yeah.
Similarly, we see that in graded work on essays. And then, of course, the highest risk of all, if you are uploading a student's essay that needs to be sent out for an external examiner, if you upload that to a generative AI, then you are sharing a student's not just private information that could be embedded into the essay, but you're also risking that it could be screened by the external examiner as either plagiarism or be seen randomly by someone else who might copy that work that really belongs to the student. So it's an enormously complex system. Wherefore, it's really important that schools help their educators understand what is it that I can do and feel safe in doing. There's very low risk. And where does the difference happen? What kind of AI means that I have to think more carefully about what I'm doing here and what's the best way for me to do it?
Awesome. So another question that is somehow related to this, you mentioned AI, chatbots in the hands of youth, children. Well, it is already happening and it is inevitable, of course, because of the number of devices available. ChatGPT is everywhere. But should it happen at a school? Some schools are at the forefront of it. Some schools are very scared that, if anything happens at a school, parents are going to, of course, not be very happy.
And I think that, schools are always a little bit scared that parents won't be happy. But I have the approach, and always have, that my parents are my greatest allies, because the kids may be spending the most of their day in the school, but I need to understand what their life is like when they get home. We talk a lot about how children are on these devices a lot, and they're working with chatbots and they're forming relationships with them. But the fact of the matter is, in a lot of schools, the children are on devices for 6, 7, maybe even 8 hours a day. In many high schools, you walk in where students have one-to-one devices, and it looks like an office landscape. All you need is the little gray partition walls to have everybody inside their little hut, and then there's no difference. They are behind those screens for many hours. If they then go home and they continue on screens, they have 2 hours of homework, and then they sit there with chatbots and maybe form a relationship with them and talk to their friends. I need the parent to tell me what that's like so that we can work together in finding the right balance for the kids. And if a kid has started leaning on something like a chatbot to help them in their learning journey, both the school and the parents need to be equally informed about what that relationship is like for that child, to make sure they can assess whether it's healthy, whether it's safe, and whether the child is still getting the support that they need. And I think what you bring up is so important. It really is a question of trust. If the parents reject it, if the teachers reject it, you will never have successful integration. Yet you need to have meaningful integration into your schools. And you need to identify together with the parents what's the right age for you to integrate this technology. A chatbot for a 9-year-old is very different than a chatbot for a 19-year-old who have more developed parts of their cerebral cortex and are starting to begin the final development of their frontal lobes. Their experience of a chatbot is very different than a 9-year-old child who might think it's very real. So again, there it's a collaborative work between home and school, and it's all hands on deck to try and unpick this together. And then each school, according to what its mission and vision is, will take their own decision about what works for their learning environment and the culture they want inside of their schools.
Okay, awesome. And when it comes to all of this, including um, how teachers should be trained, what we should consider, or what school leaders should consider before implementing tools, in generally speaking, do you think teachers are now finally being adequately prepared for the AI responsibility, or do you think they're being thrown into the deep end without much support available?
I think, I'm trying to say this as nicely as I can, but I think they're being set up to fail, and that is the nicest way that I could possibly put that. I think that teachers are left without the tools they need to make the right decisions. They are put under enormous pressure by the hype cycle that they're supposed to integrate. They're supposed to do ABC, but with no clear understanding of what it is that they're really supposed to do and how to do it well. They are not getting the support they need, both in terms of actual the resources, in terms of time. It's not just time for a 1 hour or 2 hour AI influencer giving them a speech about how cool AI is. It's time to not only being introduced to it, try their hands with it, actually test it in a safe space, then integrate it into their apartment and department, and then discuss inside of their department how they wish to use it. What is the thing that works best when you're teaching languages? What kind of AI would be great to use when you're teaching the hard sciences? What would be a way that AI could be used, maybe in combination with drone technology, when you're teaching physical education? And could you collab with the physics department on doing calculations based on what you experience there? That requires teachers to be given the time to develop that together, to sit with it together and really put their ideas into the rink and develop a system for experimentation. And teachers are not given time. We see the very opposite is happening, that they have less and less time. And we're also seeing some teachers reporting back that the time they gained by using AI is simply just being used to give them even more work, which is the opposite of what we wanted. So I think that time is key, and time requires financial resources. It requires bigger budgets, and that is the one thing that every school, I think, on the planet struggles with is resources. Time and money is what schools need, and so really it becomes a federal issue. It becomes a question of whether governments will step in and say, we're investing 100% in this and we understand what you need. And until we see that, we're still going to have teachers falling behind.
So it is very clear that governments have to be involved one way or the other. We see this happening quite a lot in developed countries, but it is also an unfortunate reality that a larger part of the world is still either underdeveloped or developing, where governments are not yet involved in the same way when it comes to governance and trainings and everything. So in that scenario, who should we consider responsible? The organization or the school leaders, um, the ed tech or AI and education um, companies that create these tools, or is it people who usually or generally train teachers in these countries? And among these three, um, who would you put more weight towards?
So I think it's absolutely a leadership issue, and so the question then is that what is the leadership that we would say you have a hand in this and you have responsibility, and I think that is both a governmental leadership issue. We need our ministers of education, our decision makers in the legislations, and our executive offices to understand what it is that needs to happen here in order to meaningfully integrate this into our schools. And it does mean that these organizations not only need to educate themselves. We see an enormous amount of people in government who don't themselves really understand what it is that's happening.
Right.
They have been taken by surprise, right? But it's also a school leadership issue. If you are a school leader and you make a decision about integrating generative AI into your school, you need to understand what it is that you're saying yes to. So that's definitely a leadership responsibility. And we know that a lot of leaders have also been taken by surprise and are only now starting to realize that all of the hype is much more complex than what they were sold to begin with. And they're only just now starting to do the work of really looking at it in a different way from not just we need to have AI for the sake of AI, but how do we need to leverage it? What would work for our organization? And then it's an individual leadership issue as well. Teachers are very much leaders inside of their classroom. At the end of the day, they are on the front line. And they do need to take that personal stake in it. They need to be able to say, I can't or won't do this because I don't have the training. I'm interested in doing this, but you have to train me first. And I know in many countries, unions are starting to wake up to this, that they are speaking on behalf of their members, saying you've got to help them do this in a safe way. And it's in the interest of everyone. So I do think that we share the responsibility. And then last but not least, big tech, absolutely. I think that they have an obligation to all of us. They are selling, they are trying to make money. That's what they're supposed to do, right? That's in the interest of them and their shareholders. But they are also embedding technologies into their system incredibly fast. They are changing their safety settings, security settings, parental updates all the time. And it's increasingly difficult to keep up with it. They make it hard to opt out of functionalities. I myself have struggled with opting out of some functionalities. I noticed that the Meta, for example, I think is a good example. They have opened up Meta AI. I didn't want it on my Instagram. I didn't want it in my WhatsApp. But in order to opt out, I had to set up a Facebook account connected with those two accounts in order to opt out. Right? Impossible for a parent to do, impossible for a child to do. So absolutely, big tech has a moral and legal obligation to all of us to do better. They have to step up.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Clara. We are just moving towards the last couple of questions. So, when it comes to the usage of these tools, what should a teacher expect from an AI tool? How much dependence do you think they should have on these tools?
Yeah, so I think right now, I think teachers have relatively limited dependence, and we're living in a really strange time where teachers both need to be prepared for going completely offline and being able to run their classes outside of the digital space. I mentioned to you before we started the interview, but I live in Spain, where we had a nationwide power outage just last week. And some schools just put the kids outside to play, but some of the older schools that are very dependent on digital technology sent the older kids home from school for the rest of the day because they had nothing to offer them. That is not a desirable situation, but increasingly losing access to digital technology through hacks or other types of breakdown in cybersecurity means that schools need to be able to be completely analog, while at the same time we have a higher need and interest in online options or hybrid options. We are expecting that another pandemic will happen here within the next decade or so, meaning that we might have to go completely digital again. Many students don't want to leave home for universities. They want to stay in their home region and learn online. And so we have this very duplex world where teachers need to be able to straddle both, and without having been given the time to really experiment on what works best for them. So I do think that a baseline for teachers is give them opportunity to start experimenting on what works for them, for their age group, in their curriculum, in their subject, in their country, under the law. And that isn't something that's going to happen either today or tomorrow. That's an integration over time. It can then be done more or less efficiently, but it is something that takes time.
Okay. So now the very last question, but it is hopefully an interesting question for you as well. If we give you a time machine and you can travel, 2 or 3 years back, and you could redesign the AI and education ecosystem from scratch, what would be the first thing you would do, having the knowledge that you already have with generative AI and its implementation?
Yeah, I love this question because I was working with students in 2019 with an early model of ChatGPT-2, where we were writing essays together, and I was sort of hollering to everybody I met, look at this thing, what we're doing here. This is a signal that something is coming and you need to get ready. And then it wasn't until November 2023 that ChatGPT 3 came out, and suddenly the world did want to listen. And I sort of thought, man, if those years had been used to prepare for ChatGPT 3, how wonderful wouldn't that have been? If I could go back in time to that 2019, what I said then and what I also said in 23 was, you need to stop what you're doing. Don't make any big decisions yet, but sit your organization down and make sure that all of you are aligned on your values, on your mission and your vision. What kind of school are you? What are you about? What is it that you believe in? What kind of student is it that you want when they leave your institution? What should their journey be like? And based on all of that being very clear, how can something like technology, whether it's relatively simple technology, should we have a tablet or not have a tablet, or more advanced technology like generative AI, how can that help us accomplish all of those things? What teachers need upskilling? What teachers are our early adopters who just want to get in and play? And who do we need to set up a sandbox for them to experiment with safely? What do our leaders need in order to drive this change into our departments? And how do we upskill them now? And then let's start setting a budget. And I can tell you today, I would tell schools, your problem is no longer generative AI. It's agentic AI. It is a VR, XR technology. It's supercomputers that allow quantum simulations and can let a kid break through the best of your firewalls in your organization. And it's early quantum computing. So we already know what's coming. Look at the
Absolutely.
trends and set your ship in the direction of those trends. That's the advice that I would have said then, and that's what I will say today.
Thank you very much, Clara. I'm very sure that it was very, very helpful for everyone who was listening to us, educators, school leaders. But personally, I would like to thank you because it was extremely helpful for me as someone working in the AI and education industry from the technology side of things. I wish you all the best for your own initiative. That is wonderful, of course. Governance is what we need. And I really hope that we would get to listen to you and your thoughts once again very soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the listeners also for hanging out with us for a little while. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking more with you on
Thank you
this.
very much, everyone who joined us, and I would, and hopefully Clara, sometime soon, we would see each other again in the next episode. Thank you very much.